Amy Ginsberg Bulware, and I am here to introduce Poppa. Go ahead.
And I'm Irv Ginsberg, also known as Poppa Irv, and we're going to have an awful lot of fun because we've been stuck in, and we need to share some of our funny stuff with you. And it's all based on stuff that you've sent to us, and so it ought to be really funny.
So we had this great idea, Ask Poppa. We've been talking about doing videos of him and his stories and things like that for years. And now that we are literally quarantined and stuck in our house, we decided we're going to do it. So I put on Facebook questions. What are things that people want to ask Poppa? So we're going to start by going through some of the questions that came up, and we'll continue. We'll do this for days and days as long as people like what we're saying. So anyway, so here is the first question. This is from Dad's friend Susan Kennedy, and she asks, Poppa, which is more indicative of a growing mental dysfunction from self-quarantine? When I talk to myself or when I talk to my cats?
I have absolutely no experience with cats, but I have lots of experience talking to myself. And the biggest problem with talking to yourself is you get into an argument and then you lose it. And when you lose an argument to yourself, the consequences are enormous. And they stay with you for a long time. So you got to be careful not to argue with yourself.
Okay, here's another question for Poppa. Who's your favorite daughter?
I didn't even know I had daughters.
Oh, darn it. Okay, we won't ask him that because Joy knows I'm the favorite. But we won't say that out loud. Just kidding. No, here's the second one. Poppa, how do I keep a staff of 300 motivated from a social distance? No interaction perspective. Still need the same productivity from home with restricted capabilities. As many of you know, Poppa Irv was a human resource executive for many, many years. And actually, this guy, Steve Robinson, said that he gave him trusted advice 30 years ago. And he's asking for his advice now. So go, Dad.
Boy, this is a pretty tough one. First of all, Steve, I imagine that you're still ugly, so that makes it a bit more difficult. But I think that you've got the language down because you talk like an Okie, and so you can talk pleasantly to your folks. The one thing you don't want to do is threaten them. If you threaten them, you're going to have a problem in getting any productivity from them. I'm not quite sure what business you're in, but you can't micromanage. You got to let them do what they do. And the thing is, many of our senior executives and corporations think that they're the reason that the company is successful, and they have absolutely nothing to do with it. You need to be direct. You can't you can't fake sincerity, and you need to be sincere. And you get to know your people. The other thing is you need to know the business of the business that you're in. If you don't know the business of the business you're in, that is a really tough one. And you need to make sure that the people are rewarded and thanked for what they do. You also need to laugh. I used to train managers, and I would tell them if you didn't have a good laugh by 11 o'clock, you were probably working at the wrong place. And Steve, you know that was the case when I was at the lab.
Okay, now we're going to have some a little bit less serious of topic, not business related. This is Rachel, our friend Rachel Warner, and she wants to know what Dad had for his school lunches and if he remembers how much they cost.
I do remember. I don't remember exactly what they were, but in grade school, we lived, maybe 5 or 6 buildings away from the school. So we used to go home for lunch, and we were always felt, that the kids that stayed for lunch had it better than the ones of us who went home. My mother made a special lunch for us every day. I never carried a lunch to school. Then when I went to junior high school, we didn't come home for lunch, but there was a little deli across the street from the junior high school. And the junior high school was PS 82. My grade school was PS 104. And I'll tell you about that in just a second. But most of the time, we would go into this deli and get a hot dog and a soda. And it cost less than a quarter, I don't know, 22 or 23 cents. And you know, one of the things about that you remember about your school, I remember the school song from '82, but I just remember the first couple of words. All hail '82, all hail. And then years later, when Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner did the 2,000-Year-Old Man, they sang a tribute to cave number 86 or something, and it brought back memories. I wish I could remember the whole song, but all hail '82, all hail. We also had, right near the school was a bagel factory. And they would be baking bagels all day and all night.
Let me tell you, he loves bagels. He eats one every single day, every morning. Bagel, cup of black coffee with some sweetener in it, and that's his morning routine. And so never misses.
We used to go over to the bagel factory. In fact, there was also a movie theater there, the Park Plaza, and at that time, it used to cost literally 14 cents to go to the movies. And then my mother or dad would give me a quarter, and we could spend the whole afternoon there. And if we went in the evening as we got older, we would always stop at the bagel factory and pick up hot bagels for the next morning.
Dad, tell them the story about your mother baking.
Oh my gosh. Now, my mother was she was the youngest of 11, and she was without a doubt the best cook of the bunch. But as far as baking, we used to kid her that she would be baking bullets for the Haganah, which was the Israeli army. And when we would have a bake sale, I would be embarrassed to bring her cookies in, and I would never identify with the cookies that she baked. Because the other kids' mothers were always baking, fancy stuff. But she was a terrible, terrible baker.
Okay, Dad, the next question is from our cousin, Melanie Conklin, and she wants to know about your photography and your if you are still taking pictures and if you have an online site for people to purchase your pictures.
I do not have a website. I'm not technically capable. I actually have a couple of presentations put together on my computer, which I really need to figure out a way to get out. And the answer to your question is I still take pictures. In fact, Amy and I went out for a walk on the river this past Sunday, and I was taking pictures then, and some of them came out pretty well. I no longer carry a camera. I take pictures with my phone, and then those that I become interested in, I can get printed, though I have serious limits on that because the place that I used to get my photos printed. Now, my specialty was taking pictures of ordinary things and places that just strike me funny. And one of the funniest pictures I took, and it's on this presentation, was a picture of the back of a plumber's truck that I took in Belgium, and it was written in English, and I think it said, "It may be shit to you, but it's money to us." And as I was taking the picture, one of the plumbers ran out of the building yelling at me, we're plumbers, we're plumbers. But I thought that picture was great. I then have a photograph that I took on another trip when we were in Paris. and I call it a rear end view of the Eiffel Tower. There was a statue in the park that runs from the Eiffel Tower towards the end of the park.
The Tuileries.
It was the Tuileries. Yeah, I couldn't remember it. And it actually is just in front of Notre Dame. And I took a picture of the Eiffel Tower from the backside of a statue, and it just hit. It just really looks hilarious. And I have a whole series of these. In fact, one of the art writers who followed me on a number of exhibits that I've had in Chattanooga liked not only my pictures, but the titling. And I need to try to share that with you, and we'll figure out a way to do that. I've got about 65 pictures on a particular presentation.
We'll figure out that after we get better at our technology stuff. Okay, next question. This goes along with your pictures and your traveling. Is what was your favorite trip that you've ever taken? That's going to be really hard. That's not going to be an easy one.
That really is difficult, but I think it was the trip to Israel. And we went to Israel, Nada and I went ourselves because we didn't want to go on a group. But we would hook up with tours there, and one of the funniest things that happened is we signed up with a tour, and we were going to go on caves just outside of Jerusalem. And the caves were really interesting. One of them was a cave that was inhabited by Bar Kokhba, who was a well-known fighter back in in ancient biblical times, and it had bird cages where they apparently kept pigeons underground. That was one of them, but the one that really caused me the most problem, we actually wound up crawling on our bellies, and we got to a place in the cave where I was so heavy I couldn't get through the passageway. Well, it turned out that there was an escape hatch, and they had me climb up a rope through this escape hatch while the rest of the people finished the tour of the underground cave. And the third cave was a place that had stalactites and stalagmites, and it was absolutely, utterly fascinating. And I've really never heard of anybody talking about that. But we also went to Bethlehem, and we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I had twisted an ankle, and I had difficulty walking. And so I sat down on a bench with a Greek Orthodox priest, and we must have had a conversation for about an hour. And this goes back now probably 20, 22 years, 25 years. And both he and I were convinced that peace was on the horizon. We were both wrong. But someday we will have peace in Israel.
You've done a lot of traveling. So to pick Israel, what was it about traveling to Israel that...
Israel is the homeland of, 3 or 4 or 5 different major religions. And it was amazing to walk through the places that we read about in the Bible and also read about in the New Testament. And it was just amazing to me that all of these religions, the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians, all started in the same place. And for years got along, but it's been a very interesting and difficult situation for many years. But we need to really work to somehow get all 3 of those religions together.
Okay, we're gonna switch to a totally different question, and we're gonna keep these to about 15 minutes so that people don't get bored with us. We'll come back again tomorrow. We're gonna do these every day while we're quarantined.
And so send us questions.
Send
if
us
you have any
questions. Send us questions. If you're friends with me or if you're friends with him, we'll get the questions. This is a big question we've had a lot of people asking about. Poppa and his brisket. He is very famous for his brisket. People want to know, what are the important things when you're making a brisket? How did you learn? And what is your knowledge about meat? Okay, go, Dad.
I am the proud SOB. I'm the proud son of a butcher. My dad had a butcher shop from time immemorial. I mean, I was a little kid running around his butcher shop on Featherbed Lane in the Bronx. And he used to show me how you decide the quality of various meats. And our favorite dinner at home, and my mother could do it, and I've really never been able to duplicate it. I've gotten close. But the first cut on the brisket, called the flat, is the more expensive cut of the meat because it's thinner, it's leaner. To me, it's also less tasty. And then there's the point cut, which is known as the decal, which is the back end of the brisket. But it starts off, you got to go find a good cow. And the better the cow, the better the grade, the better the roast. And
he literally used to go every morning with my grandfather out to the slaughterhouses. So that's no joke. But we don't do that now. We're not going out looking for cows.
And in fact, one of the slaughterhouses was a place that was owned by a company called New York Butchers. And it is on the same plot of land where the United Nations is now located. Now, don't forget, I was growing up in the 1940s, and the United Nations really, it started off in the late 40s, but the building wasn't built until the middle 50s, 1950s. And so I used to go with him to the slaughterhouse. And whenever my dad used to come to visit us, wherever we were living, the first place he wanted me to take him was to the supermarkets so he could look at the meat counters. What you want to look for is a brisket that is thick. I don't really care for the first cut, though I have used and continue to use the whole brisket. A whole brisket probably weighs 12 to 15 pounds, and there's a lot of fat on it. And for most of you, you would have to get the fat trimmed by the butcher, and they're happy to do it. In fact, most of the meat that you get now is already pre-trimmed. You want to make sure that there's still some fat on it. Okay, you need a heavy pot. Gosh, I don't even know how you would describe it. I have a heavy aluminum pot, and would you believe it is the only thing that I ever received after my mother passed away. And I've had it, and my mom and dad got it for their.
I'll go get it so you can see it. Keep talking.
Okay. And what you want to do is you need to. This is my recipe, and I'll tell you about another recipe in just a couple of minutes. You need to get the fat trimmed to about maybe a quarter to a half inch on the top. The bottom is going to be pretty lean anyway. Here is the pot. It's a pretty big pot, as you can see. It's very heavy. In fact, I don't even know if they make these anymore. Okay, and so what you're going to do is you start seasoning it. Kosher salt, pepper, and paprika. And you gotta and be very generous in seasoning up both sides of the meat. Then you're going to heat up maybe a quarter of a cup of vegetable oil. You want to use an oil that isn't going to give any taste. All you want to do is you want to sear it on both sides. Then take the meat out, and in the meantime, prepare in a large bowl 3 or 4 or 5 cans of small potatoes. And I like the canned potatoes rather than the raw potatoes. Drain them off and save some of the liquid. Those are going to be seasoned. Put them in a bowl, put some oil on, vegetable oil, and mix it up, and then take, and this is a secret, you can't tell anybody, a little package of Lipton onion soup, and put it in with potatoes, mix it up, make sure that they get really covered. In addition to that, you want to cut up as many onions as you can handle. I use 4 or 5 onions, and I slice them up and put them in with the potatoes. Okay, now we have the empty pot, and what you're going to do is you're going to spread the potatoes out on the bottom of the pot. You're then going to put the seared beef on top of the potatoes. And now you're going to spread another package of Lipton onion soup, drizzle it over the top of the meat. Then put some of the liquid, and you really, whatever's left in 1 can of potatoes, the liquid, that's all you really need. You're going to come out with an awful lot of gravy.
Grease.
And grease. And grease. And actually, the fatter the meat, the tastier the roast. Okay, then you're going to set your oven at 325. You're going to put a cover on the pot. And when the oven reaches time, put the roast in. Now you got to promise not to look at it for at least 3.5 hours. And that is for a roast that's going to run anywhere from 5 to 8 pounds. You need to check it at 3.5 hours, and you get used to it so that you know what to do. But the way you test it is open up and be very careful in opening the pot, because there'll be smoke will come out. The heat really dissipates pretty quickly and with some force. See if the meat is tender by putting a fork in and trying to pull it apart. If it's ready, take the meat out, leave the potatoes in, because they'll stay warm for a while, and then you let it sit for about 15 minutes just to calm down, and then slice it thin with a very sharp knife. Now, how sharp is a sharp knife? The sharper the knife, the easier the slice. If you have to work on slicing the meat, then your knife is not sharp enough. And I use a sharpening steel, which my dad taught me how to use. But if you're uncomfortable with that, you can get all these kind of sharpeners where you just drag the knife through, through a crevice and the sharpening blades. And you want to set that up on a serving tray so that it's nicely displayed. The gravy, and then take the potatoes out. You can serve that around the roast or in a separate Dad,
isn't there a right and a wrong way to cut it?
Yes, you need to cut I'm glad you said that. You need to cut it against the grain. Now, what that means is the meat, if you look at it, it's going to look like this, so that the grain goes like, in a straight way. You want to cut it across the grain, If you cut it with the grain, it comes out very stringy, and regardless of how long you cooked it, it will be very tough. And that's just not the way to do it. And people will say, oh my gosh, you really worked on it, and all you did is you just cooked it. Now, I like to buy the whole brisket and actually trim it myself. And my dad used to be able to trim up a brisket in 10, 12 minutes. It usually takes me about a half hour to, to get it the way he used to get it. And I have some sharp knives. But everybody loves it. And in fact, when we first moved here, we became members of the B'nai Zion congregation. And I did a dinner for them. And we cooked 29 whole briskets. 29 whole briskets. And I don't like to use a machine to slice the meat. And it took me 2 days to slice the meat so that I got it the way I want. Now, with the gravy, the gravy is going to be, in the pot with the potatoes. I would take the potatoes out and then add a little bit of flour to thicken up the gravy, but you need to be very careful with how much flour you put in. And for those of you that have cooked, you know how to thicken gravy. But if not, it's worth the chance. And the gravy becomes a very important part of the, in Yiddish, it's called a meichel, a good tasting dinner.
Okay, well, there we have it. This is our first attempt at Ask Poppa.
Let us know if this is of interest. And if you have any questions, there are no bars, nothing's held back. Whatever you want to ask. And in fact, in one of our next sessions, somebody asked a question of my first job, and I'll only give you a hint about it. I was a sightseeing guide while I was an undergraduate at City College of New York, and I was a sightseeing guide in New York City. And I've got some stories that you'll really enjoy hearing about.
All right, we will see you next time.